Welcome into Sports 2.0 show. I'm your host, Alec Busse, joined again by Will Reed to discuss some UFC. And then Vincent was supposed to join us last week, but he had some stuff pop up, and he's a real UFC expert of the two of us. So we're happy to have him on this week as we recap UFC 264. Of course, we've got a lot to talk about with Conor McGregor. But guys, before we get to that, are you excited for the Home Run Derby tonight?
I'm excited. Yeah, it's going to be fun in Colorado. The balls are going to be flying.
No, I'm excited. I'm going to be joined by Alec and a few other people on the Sports 2.0 network for a live show, live watch party of the Home Run Derby. I'm repping my Nationals gear, hoping for Juan Soto to pull out a nice victory. He's got Shohei Ohtani in the first round, so basically the toughest draw in the whole bracket, but maybe he can make something happen.
Yeah, I can tell you I'm super excited for it. I love the Home Run Derby, especially, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier before the show. The bracket has made it so much more entertaining. It's faster paced. There's more swings. Balls are flying all over the place a little bit more. All right, that's enough for the Home Run Derby for now. Let's talk about UFC 264. And, guys, I think it was a pretty good night for UFC overall. What are your big takeaways from Saturday night?
I thought the card was great. I liked all the fights on the main card. I was watching it all the way from the prelims. I had some nice bets going, some parlays rocking. I hit a few, missed a few, so it wasn't a terrible night. But overall, I think the whole UFC 264 card was a success on the UFC's part. They had some great fights, some nice knockouts, some nice performances. I think it was just a great night of UFC overall.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, besides the co-main and the main event, everything was great. I mean, the co-main kind of disappointed with Gilbert Burns and Stephen Thompson. I expected that to be a brawl, but was kind of boring, more tactical for Gilbert. Thompson was just trying to avoid the takedown, but he wasn't able to do that. My guy Sugar Sean O'Malley put on. That was a great performance. I mean, props to Moutinho for he was a zombie, walking dead man in there, taking power shots left and right, but that was a fun fight to watch. And then obviously the main event didn't end how anyone expected or wanted, but it is what it is.
All right, Vincent, you kind of mentioned it there, so let's get right into it, of course. Dustin Poirier is able to beat Conor McGregor in the first round after McGregor breaks his ankle or his tibia, whatever exactly it was. It looked like it was pretty serious. He kind of went down in pain, and ringside doctor declared that he wasn't going to be able to finish the fight. Guys, to me, I think a lot of people are focusing on the fact that McGregor broke his ankle, but I also look at the fact that Poirier was really winning that fight, and he dominated from the beginning. Once he slipped that guillotine that McGregor tried to put on him, he immediately just kind of started throwing elbows and punches towards McGregor, and he had him on the cage the entire time. That was going to be a big key, like Will said, going on the show, whatever night that was, as we previewed it, was going to be big for McGregor to not get on the ground and not get on the cage, and that's exactly where he ended up. So, guys, what were your kind of takeaways from McGregor breaking his leg?
It was tough to see, but as you mentioned it, Poirier really had his number in that first round. He did slip that guillotine from McGregor, really something McGregor really doesn't go to a lot. Usually he goes for the takedown defense. This time he tried to kind of counter it with that guillotine, and obviously it did not work out well for him. Once they got down to the ground, they were just exchanging those elbows kind of back and forth. And then Poirier was really able just to kind of open him up and get some punches in freely at the end there. McGregor wasn't really defending himself well as he was trying to get up. Then they exchanged a few punches when they got back up, and obviously we saw what happened next with McGregor's leg. But it really was going Poirier's way. I do think McGregor would have had a decent shot to make some noise in the second and third rounds if it got there, but Poirier really did have his advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Conor's an underrated fighter off of his back. I mean, what a lot of people don't notice is that the ground and pound looked bad, but if you look at McGregor today, you see there's no marks on his face. He posted a bunch of videos, and one thing that people don't really realize McGregor does is this was even in the Khabib fight. Khabib actually landed more than ground and pound, but McGregor actually deflects some of those punches and the elbows with his own elbows when he's in the guard. He has his hands up, and he takes a lot of those punches and deflects them. I mean, some of them still got through, obviously, but I think McGregor's underrated off of his back. The problem with that was we saw McGregor actually against Chad Mendes a while back in the interim title fight get up off of his back and knock Chad out after Chad gassed out. McGregor's been talking about how much he's been training his gas tank and this and that. I mean, we haven't seen him go anywhere past 2 rounds in years. So I would have liked to see him go past the first round and see what he's been talking about. Has this whole McGregor fast system. I want to see if his cardio is really improved, because nobody will know until we find out in the cage, in the octagon. So it was kind of a disappointment for it to end right there.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on a good point there, Vincent. It was a real big disappointment to see the fight end the way it kind of did. I think there was so much build up to it. There's so much talk. There was so much excitement building up around the fight. Obviously, it's the third time the two have fought, and the first two ended in pretty exciting knockouts. And I think we expected this one to kind of at least go a little bit longer, or if it was going to end in the first or second round, it was going to end in a crazy knockout like the fight in January did. You know what I mean? And it's disappointing to see McGregor get hurt the way he did, and whether he broke it on a kick or on a defense, or whether he completely broke it on, getting punched in the face so hard that his ankle rolled, something I've hope never happens to me, I guess, because that looked painful. But, it was difficult to see the fight end that way, because there's a lot of expectation and a lot of buildup towards it.
No, yeah, I feel the exact same way, but I feel if this were to happen in any other fight, the antics at the end we wouldn't have seen. I mean, we wouldn't have gone to any other fighter after they break their leg to interview them. The fact that you're having Joe Rogan down on the mat with Conor McGregor as they're tending to his leg, that wouldn't have happened with any other fighter. And that's why I think the UFC kind of still got their money's worth out of this one. They had McGregor and Poirier screaming at each other while McGregor was on the ground saying remarks about Poirier's wife. He was doing some crazy things from the ground there, and they still put on a show. That's what you get with Conor McGregor. That's what you get with Dustin Poirier. They still put on the show that the fans were expecting. It just wasn't as long as we wanted it to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think a lot of people are kind of putting down Conor and putting him in a bad light after all that. I mean, it's crazy because everyone's like, oh, where are Conor's antics after the second fight? And then he brings it back and everyone's like, oh, this is terrible. But a lot of people are like making Dustin out to be the good guy. He Billy strutted Conor's signature walk right on Conor when he's laying on the ground with a broken ankle. I mean, obviously it's one of the biggest fights in McGregor's career. His emotions boiled over. He shouldn't have said what he said about Dustin's wife, but I mean, it goes both ways. I mean, it's a tough sport. These guys genuinely do not like each other. I mean, after a broken leg, I mean, people could say like, oh, they're just putting it on for the money, like here and there. But after a broken leg, to see stuff like that still go on, I mean, I don't think that's for show, but it was interesting.
I also thought it was unfortunate because these guys put in so much training and effort for months and months, and they do all of that just so they can avoid injuries and weird things like this too. And it just happens to McGregor right at the end of that first round, and you can't help but feel bad for him. I mean, obviously he said what he said, but he's really, I mean, he really put his work in for this fight, and to have it taken away by an injury like that, I just have to feel bad for him.
All right, guys, let's kind of get to a bigger impact here. What does this loss do for Conor McGregor's career? I think he's 1-3 now in his last 4 fights. Vincent, you kind of hit on it earlier. We haven't seen him go more than 1 or 2 rounds in several years. He's now 1-2 all time against Dustin Poirier, and Poirier beat him pretty bad in his last 2 fights, whether you want to consider this thing with the broken leg kind of luck or not. I think for me personally, one of my biggest reactions or major questions maybe was, did we see Conor McGregor take a huge advantage of lesser talented fighters early in his career when we saw him, knocking guys out within seconds or less than minutes of fights in the first round? Did we see Conor McGregor just evolve the sport so much more ahead of his time, and now everyone else has kind of caught up with him as he's gotten older and other people have gotten better? Or is this just Conor McGregor just kind of getting old?
Vincent, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think earlier in McGregor's career, some of the competition he fought was amazing. I mean, obviously, some of the earlier fights he didn't fight as great competition, like building up to his fame, but like he burst onto the scene pretty quick. I mean, Mendez, that was a great fight. He was a great fighter. Aldo was at the time one of the greatest pound for pound in the UFC history. He knocked him out within seconds. I think McGregor's striking ability is still amazing, but it's hard in mixed martial arts. It's a lot different than boxing to go on a win streak like many people have. Like even with Khabib, he only fought in the UFC 13 times. I mean, not saying anyone would have beat him. I think he's the greatest fighter of all time, but it's hard to win that many fights in a row and just keep winning and winning. But it's unfortunate Conor hasn't looked like himself. I mean, I would have liked to see him go more, but I think this goes one of two ways for Conor. I think it's either going to be retirement or he's going to come back better than ever. I mean, I was looking and it was interesting. A lot of people are talking about Conor's age, and Conor's only 32. There's only a few UFC champions under the age of 32, and there's only one under the age of 30, which is Brandon Moreno. Jan Blachowicz is 38, Ngannou's 34, Usman's 34, and then the rest are 31 or 32. So I think the age thing is something a lot of people are looking into a bit too much because he rose at such a young age. So, yeah, I think this goes either one of two ways. Either he retires and walks off into the sunset, or he comes back better than ever.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with with Vincent. I mean, people look at the age thing because he's been in the UFC for so long. Same thing with John Jones. John Jones and him both came out super young, and both were able to come onto the scene into the championship contention super quick. So that's why they seem like they've been so old. Like, I mean, other players, it's not like we're like talking about the NFL with Tom Brady. He's been there for 23, 24 years now, and he's been the big name for a long time now. But no, McGregor's been there probably for about 8-9 years as one of the top dogs in the UFC. So age isn't really a big factor. I agree there. But I do think that this loss kind of means that McGregor won't be getting those big time fights that he was before. He won't be the big. He'll still be a big time draw, but he's not really deserving of the big time fights that could be implicating kind of title contention. So I could see him going into another fight, maybe against Diaz for the trilogy. Obviously, Poirier, McGregor, and Dana White all stated that they want a fourth fight because that's not how you want to end a trilogy matchup. But I don't know if he really has the championship in him after this fight.
Yeah, I think you mentioned some pretty interesting things there, Will. You talk about him not maybe being the headliner. I think he's always going to be the headliner in whatever fight he is because I think he's still going to be the face of the UFC for a very long time. But I think that if he is to take a fight against an Nate Diaz, like you kind of said, or Jorge Masvidal, like those are going to be fights that are going to garner a lot of attention, but they don't necessarily matter in the landscape of where UFC is going at the moment. If we're 6 months from now, 7 months from now, I guess maybe even a little bit longer than now, just with McGregor coming off this injury, and it's a pretty serious thing. I mean, especially for a fighter who's going to try and be kicking and using that part of your leg and defending kicks with that part of your leg. It's hard to come back from something like that. So say we're, 7-8 months from now and he's taking a fight against Nate Diaz, that fight doesn't have a lot of an impact on, that weight class or going down a weight class because he's not fighting at a championship level anymore. He's not deserving of a belt. And that's the thing too, in my opinion, with people talking about us getting to a fourth fight with Dustin Poirier. I mean, first of all, like we haven't seen McGregor, or we've never seen a fight go four times in UFC history. I mean, we've only seen two guys fight 3 times, so that'd be unprecedented in UFC history to see them fight a fourth time. And two, I think you're gonna have to see them both win at least one more time to fight again. And obviously, Poirier is gonna have a good opportunity to win a belt, fighting against Charles Oliveira, and McGregor's going to have to figure out his best path to get back to fighting against Poirier. And however he does that for a fourth fight will be really interesting. And if it's for a belt, that's going to be great for the sport, I think. But, if you fight 4 times and McGregor wins, do you then try and do a 5th fight?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, there's really the only way I think McGregor sees Poirier within his next 2 fights is if Poirier loses the title fight to Charles. I think if Poirier wins that fight, Conor will take the Diaz fight. And after that, I mean, if he wins, he's got a lot of decisions to make. Does he want to continue to just take the big fights, or does he want to move back into the title conversation? Because ultimately, if Dustin does win that belt, and he's not going to get a shot at Dustin again, he knows that. I think he'll have to build himself back up. I think he's going to want to fight Dustin again. So it's going to be up to him really. If he could win fights, obviously. I think if he takes another loss, it's going to be tough for him to continue fighting.
No, yeah, I agree there too. I mean, and McGregor's going to have a lot of time to make his decision. Obviously, this injury is not going to be an easy one to come back from. I mean, we're getting into the late part of 2021 here. We wouldn't be seeing him till late 2022 is my expectation. He needs a lot of time to recover from that injury, and then a lot of time to train the leg back up. So, I mean, Poirier's got time to win that belt and maybe potentially lose it. Or if he loses this next one, maybe McGregor wants to open it up for that fourth fight. But if I like what you said, Vincent, if Poirier does win that belt, I think we're going to be seeing a Nate Diaz type fight again. Try to finish off that trilogy. It would make the most sense for the UFC and for McGregor at their certain point, at McGregor's point in his career, and what the UFC is trying to move towards, just money wise. So I think those would be the best moves so far.
Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense for Nate Diaz to take that fight. I mean, Nate Diaz has been deserving of that third fight. I mean, he beat him all the way back in, 2015, knocked him out. And that's kind of like his biggest claim to fame. And he still remembered pretty well for that win against McGregor. And that's a third fight that I think needs to happen at some point. Now, when it happens, I don't necessarily know, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see when it happens or how it comes together, whether that's the next fight for both of them. And if McGregor decides to not retire, I think that's probably going to be where he ends up going, because I think that's kind of where he has to go. Guys, do you think retirement is a legitimate chance for McGregor? I mean, he's retired 3 times now, going back to 2016, did it in 2019, and then he did it in June of 2020, I think, as well, too. So, like, is retirement a thing for him? Does he just kind of sail off in the sunset, take some sort of role within UFC as an executive of some sort of position?
Honestly, I've followed McGregor throughout his entire career, and I don't think he'll retire. I mean, for him, he's always wanted to prove himself right, and I think going out on 2 losses like this and one of his last 4 is not what he's going to do. He's going to, like, he manifests confidence. He's a big confidence guy. I don't think he'll want to be remembered as the guy who went out on 2 losses. I think he'll be back, but you never know. I mean, a guy with that much money just snapped his leg. Like, I mean, I wouldn't continue to do it, but he's got a completely different mindset than a lot of guys. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, judging off of what he's been sending out recently from his hospital bed after the surgery, he seems pretty focused on making a return whenever that may be. I do agree with Vincent. He wants to go out with some sort of bang, some sort of big time finish. He's Conor McGregor. He's one to put on a show. But I mean, Vincent did mention it. He's a very rich guy. He's got a lot of things going for him. He has a nice family back in Ireland that he really cares about. So I wouldn't put retirement out of the picture. But knowing Conor McGregor and how he is, it seems pretty clear that he's going to want to come back and kind of go on a redemption path.
All right, guys, let's get to our last point before we go and prep for this Home Run Derby show later tonight. Well, what does Conor McGregor's legacy look like now? To me, I think he's always going to be the fighter that built up UFC into what it is today and what we kind of recognize it as today. And obviously, there's a couple other names in there that really helped it to be big. But to me, Conor McGregor is always going to be the one that's remembered for it. And Vincent made a really good point earlier in the fact that it's really hard to put together long winning streaks in UFC and not, get knocked out or not lose a fight here or there. It's not boxing. It's a much more physically demanding sport in a lot of different ways than boxing is. So, guys, what do you think Conor McGregor's legacy looks like?
I think it's going to be tough because you can look at it 2 ways. I mean, Conor was one of the most amazing fighters. I mean, he did so much early in his career. He simultaneously held 2 belts. He was the first person in the UFC to do that. I mean, that's an amazing accomplishment. But down the road, I mean, I don't consider him past his prime. So, like, I don't think people can, like, say he was washed up when he lost these fights. So I think it's tough. You can look at it 1 of 2 ways. I mean, everyone's always going to have respect for him. He built up the sport. And even I saw, I don't know if you guys saw, but Ronda Rousey tweeted out, I can't believe like Conor had the wherewithal to promote his next fight while he's sitting on the ground with a snapped leg. He's screaming at the Herb Dean or Bruce, whoever he was screaming at, that it was a doctor stoppage. He didn't even worry about the broken leg. He just didn't want to go down as a TKO. I mean, he's just kind of different. He's got his own kind of mindset. I mean, I think a lot of people, there's fans of him and then there's people who hate him. I think there's just the two sides. There's nobody that's really in the middle. So it's going to be based on your perspective of how you like him. If you like him, I mean, you're going to remember him for what he did with the 2 titles. If you hate him, you're going to be remembering all this stuff and Jake Paul talking crap about him on social media. That's the stuff you remember. And that's what I think we'll get from the younger generation right now. And I think kind of our age and above will kind of remember what Conor did a while back.
I mean, yeah, our age and above will kind of remember the Conor McGregor that burst on the scene as probably one of the best strikers to come into the UFC. He was very fluid. He was super technical. I mean, that Jose Aldo fight ended in 13 seconds. It was just a simple 1-2-3 combination. Caught Jose as he was coming towards him and just put Jose to sleep. And those type of highlights are what I'm going to remember from Conor McGregor. I mean, obviously the 2 belts that Vincent mentioned. I mean, he grew this sport. He's had so much influence over it. His influence is undeniable. I mean, people coming in right now like Sugar Sean O'Malley take a lot from Conor McGregor. They're reading his books. They're basing their fight styles off of him. There's going to be a lot of people coming into the UFC, I expect, that are going to be exactly like Conor McGregor, try to replicate that persona and that personality. But no one's going to quite be like the first big-time personality, Conor McGregor.
So, guys, I want to throw a name out there, and how we remember this name that I'm going to throw out there. Maybe if you think this is kind of a similar way to how we're going to remember Conor McGregor in 10, 15, 20 years. Let's think about Mike Tyson's career in boxing. He comes in and he just lights up the sport, lights up all of his opponents, and then he just has just kind of this downfall after his kind of outside of the ring kind of things, and everyone remembers him getting knocked out and trying to find his mouth guard. And obviously McGregor wasn't in that situation, but he does break his leg. Is that kind of a similar comparison where I think that there's still this aura around Mike Tyson of, don't want to be in a ring with him because he could kill you with one punch, and you don't want to be in an octagon with McGregor because he could kill you with one punch. But as they got older and things kind of started to progress, they just weren't the same as they were when they were younger. Do you think that that's kind of an apt comparison of the two fighters?
Yeah, I actually like that example. I mean, I think that's a very good example. I didn't even think about that, but this is like what we're talking about. Mike Tyson is still around. People see him in social media. He's still doing his thing. I think that's kind of what will end up happening with Conor McGregor. I don't think he'll ever go away. He'll always be around the sport. And that's the same thing with Mike Tyson, even Floyd Mayweather, but Floyd Mayweather never lost that, obviously. He's still around boxing. He's coaching younger guys. Tyson's like a big personality, and I think that's definitely what we'll see with McGregor down the line.
No, yeah. Vincent mentioned it. I mean, we're still having random exhibition Mike Tyson fights to this day that are pulling in a bunch of money. I can see McGregor doing that. He's such a big personality. We talked about this on our preview show, Alec, that McGregor might be a great move for him to kind of join the booth and talk with Joe Rogan, maybe be one of the commentators for the UFC. That would be something great that I would love to see. I'm sure Dana White would love to see that as well. Maybe he can work that up. But no, I mean, he'll always be remembered to be one of those flashy guys. He'll be big time. I mean, I loved Conor McGregor. I can tell Vincent was a big fan, following up all of his career. So I like that comparison to Mike Tyson.
Wow, I'm not very good at comparisons, so I appreciate you guys both taking that one. Anyway, guys, I think that's all the time we have for today's show, breaking down UFC 264. Thank you to everyone watching. Anything you guys want to plug before we get out of here?
I'll just say subscribe to the Sports 2.0 Network. I think we're just about to near 600 subscribers. We'll have a big-time watch party. Me and Alec will be on there for the Home Run Derby later tonight at 8 p.m., so make sure to tune into that. And other than that, go Juan Soto.
I won't say go Juan Soto, but make sure you do everything else that we'll mention there. Make sure to subscribe to the 2.0 Network. We appreciate you guys watching, and have a great evening, everyone. And make sure to place your bets on the Home Run Derby and the All-Star Game tomorrow.